Hey guys, it's Erin, and yesterday I took us down a rabbit hole talking about Runaway Bride. And when I was talking about Runaway Bride, I was referring to brides under the age of 18. And I stumbled across this whole subject while researching the runaway label throughout history and its effect on the child when it comes to media and society and how we perceive the word runaway and how it is typically synonymous with bad child or troubled kid, and I wanted to see where that happened in history. So I dove into the archives and I came across lots of runaway brides. I'm prepared to add this to an avenue that I was going to look and analyze the runaway label attached to, but now I am because I just can't let it go. I'm only into 1920s today, so just like with my other subset of data, I started in 1895, and this time I drilled down to runaway bride specifically, and I wanted to see how many times that brought me to an underage girl in a marriage that she didn't want to be in or a marriage in which she was groomed into. And Miss Ethel here is a perfect example of how many runaway brides there were and how rampant of a problem this was all the way up into the 60s. I think the last article I see is in 71, 72. So this problem persists for way longer than it needed to in society. Ethel's case actually makes pretty big headlines because Ethel is a 14-year-old bride who has run away again from another husband. That's correct. She's 14 and this is now her second husband. Both marriages she was forced into by her parents, and both marriages she has run away from. Of course, they don't list the age of her husband. It seemed like they had gone out of their way typically not to list the age of the husband. Now, if they run away with a young boy, they definitely list that age. And when they do list the age in the newspaper, when they finally do acknowledge the age of these men, they are anywhere from 26, 33 to 40, married to anywhere from 12, 14, 15, 16, and 17. So in Ethel's case, she runs away again because she does not want to be married to this man that her parents are forcing her to marry. What are her options? She can't go back home because her parents won't take her, and she now is property of this man. So what does law enforcement do? They label her a runaway, and they track her down and they bring her back to her husband. It got to the point where Ethel said that she was so done doing this that she was ready to take herself out of this world. So Ethel, who's only 14, is now labeled a runaway. A lot of these runaways are picked up and charged under the juvenile system as immorality charges, runaway charges, whenever they leave their husband or these young girls are found with men older than there should be married to these young girls. It seems the adult seems to skip out on a lot of the blame and many charges. There are men that do get charged. They're very small. In fact, sometimes the papers protect them. They won't name the adult males' names, and they won't list their age, or they'll just list their age and what they've done. And these girls will go through the system. They are now labeled as a troubled child, a bad kid. And we can see where this runaway label starts to be a very clear label slapped on children stating that they are the problem. And when I say that this is not a one-off, and the few that I found when I was just researching Runaway Youth were not a one-off, it was such a big problem by the 20s that a girl-to-girl movement was created to help runaway girls who have left home through love adventures or because of unhappy domestic conditions. A Girls Protective League is being formed in various young societies in New York. It is estimated that 4,000 of these girls came to New York during the last year, and about half of them are struggling to live without friends in the city and have drifted into bad company and disgrace. This new girl-to-girl movement, as it is called, aims at enrolling 1,500 working girls with homes of their own who will pledge themselves to give certain amounts of time to work among the runaways. In 1920s, these girls were well aware that nobody was going to help them. Law enforcement wasn't going to help them. Their parents weren't going to help them. They were in situations with people they shouldn't be in, and they weren't going to get help there. So they banded together to help each other. So when I tell you this was a huge problem in our society, this is everything you need to know of how bad it really was. Another perfect example. Her husband awakes and she is gone the day after marrying him. She is 16, he is 28. She leaves in the middle of the night while he's asleep, steals his money, steals his car, and takes off to try to get somewhere safe. They do track her down and arrest her. And when they're talking to her, they ask her why she left to begin with and that she's going to go back to her husband. And she explains that he was abusive to her before the marriage, but the second that ring was on her finger, he was very abusive to her. And she could not stay, did not want to stay. And she wasn't stealing and robbing this man. She was taking enough money and a vehicle to get away from this man. But her fatal flaw was leaving letters written by her friend behind about where she should go and where she can hide out, because they just followed her out to Detroit, Michigan and picked her up. And they brought her back and they charged her as a runaway. They labeled her as a runaway and they tracked her down like she was a runaway. So she's old enough to marry someone, but she's not old enough to choose to leave them. And something you can see while you're digging through these papers and these articles is that we knew as a society by 1920 that this was not okay. We were coming to the decision that these age gaps were not okay, that these forced marriages were not okay, that these young girls that were willingly going to marry these men that were much older than them were not okay. But we were still putting the onus on the child. It was still the bad child that ran away when they didn't want to stay in these marriages. Or in a case of a 12-year-old married to a 33-year-old, it was the young girl who lured this man into this marriage. And again, she's labeled as a runaway from her parents and charged with immorality charges and usually put into girls' group homes. We're talking about this being 1920 and how they were able to label these children as the problem, and the adults take the least amount of responsibility. And this continues far, far into to even today. While we are much better about it, this is still a big problem, and we see it so much in our missing children community. We have to learn this history, to learn from this history, to do better. These kids deserve better. So I'm only in the 1920s, and we are going to dig deeper because we know that this is still a problem. This is still an issue. So I'll see you guys next time.